Right. Hi, everyone. We're going to just walk through Freud. So this will help you to get through the material in a relaxing and easy way. Okay, so why Freud matters. When understanding the revolutions in thought that happened from the late 19th to the early 20th century, Darwin, Marx, and Freud were the giants who challenged and revolutionized everything that people were thinking about at that time. Darwin took humanity from the center of creation. Marx overturned the social and moral order, putting dialectic class struggle in place of this is how it should be, this is divinely ordained. Okay. He turned everything upside down. Freud overthrew Cartesian dualism, the mind being spiritual, the body material, and this was shocking, transgressive, and founded an absolute outpouring of new intellectual thought about psychology and humanity. And this is before you even get to sex and sexuality. Okay, there are multiple choice questions you can go through. The trick with them is to read them before you start studying, just to give you an idea of where you need to go with the studying. Can you answer the questions at the end? Okay, everything comes from the textbook. I've just summarized it. It's a good idea to read it. Heaven knows what I've missed. Okay, so there are three basic assumptions that underlie Freudian psychology. Number one, psychosocial conflict. There's conflict within the person between the ego, superego, and the id, and there's conflict between the person and moral norms, between what your drives tell you to do and what is morally acceptable in society. Okay, it's founded on the ideas of biological and psychic determinism, in other words, caused and overseen by biology and by psychic requirements, and a mechanistic assumption, so that you would see it very much like Newtonian physics. You could apply Newtonian physics to psychic energy in terms of consumption of energy, conservation of energy, and transformation of energy. Okay, there are three parts to the personality. The id. The id is mostly unconscious. It is wish fulfilling. It's irrational. It's immoral. It's driven by biological drive. So the id wants what it wants. It can't think rationally about, oh, this is how I'll get what I want, or this is right, or this is wrong, or this is real and this is imaginary. It's all the same. It's just driven by biological drives and primary processes. Just wants, no thinking. And the pleasure principle, which we'll look at in a mo. Okay, the ego is closest to the I that we normally think of. The ego is the part of the mind and the psyche that is a realist and rational. Okay, the ego balances the urges of the id and of the superego, and it manages secondary processes, planning and thinking, and it is governed by the reality principle. The superego basically means internalized social morality and is governed by the moral principle. Cathexis. In psychoanalysis, cathexis is the process of allocating mental or emotional energy to a person, object, or idea. Okay, so the drive gets directed to something external to the person having the drive. Okay, there's a little definition. Okay, earlier Freud looked at three levels of consciousness: the conscious level, in which you are aware of your thoughts and feelings; the pre-conscious, which can be brought into consciousness. It's just that it's not in the forefront of your mind. So, for example, memories. If I ask you to think about what you were doing when, okay, some historical time, you can remember it. Right now, you're not thinking about it, but you can remember it. It's pre-conscious, what you had for breakfast. Okay, unconscious. These are forbidden, painful, and frightening drives, desires, wishes, and memories. Okay, and the ego does not want to remember them. Okay, there's a little question key you can do. Okay, there are 4 characteristics of the drives. Number 1, they have a source. The source is from the physical body because it's biologically determined. Number 2, they have impetus. That's energy or intensity. Again, the mechanistic principles of what drives people. They have a goal. The goal can satisfy the drive, or is to satisfy the drive. And they have an object, which is the thing that can give satisfaction. So source from the physical body, impetus, the amount of energy. The goal is to satisfy the drive, and the object is the thing that can provide the satisfaction. Okay, objects can be substituted. For example, a dummy is substituted for the mother's breast in small children. This is called displacement. However, object cathexis cannot be completely displaced, which may cause problems. If a child never gets to suckle the mother's breast, they're going to have an increased desire, or there could be a neurosis later in life. Okay. So what is the source, the impetus, the goal, and the object in this situation of the cheetah hunting the springbok? Okay, the baby springbok. So looking at the cheetah, the source would be hunger. The impetus would be the amount of energy the cheetah is putting into hunting. The goal would be to satisfy hunger, and the object would be a baby springbok. For the baby springbok, the source would be the immediate danger to its life. The impetus would be the amount of energy that it's using to escape the danger. That's maximum life force. The goal would be to live. And the object, I don't think there is an object there, so that doesn't fit so neatly. All right. A matter of life and death, eros and thanatos, the 2 types of drive. Okay, so you can divide drives into 2 types. One is about life and one is about death. So the life drive you can divide into ego drive for basic survival and sex drive for procreation, okay, and erotic pleasures, and often seen as immoral. Thanatos is the death drive, and it explains war, aggression, murder, and death for Freudian psychoanalysts. Okay. The 3 ego anxieties. Number 1, reality anxiety. The fear of real dangers, okay, is a type of ego anxiety. Number 2, neurotic anxiety. Fear of the unconscious and unsatisfied drives from the id. For example, repressed sexual desire, being afraid of having those desires so that you're afraid to express them, to even experience them is frightening. And 3, moral anxiety. Okay, that's fear of moral censure from the superego due to forbidden drives and desires. So I fear my sexuality because it's wrong. That would be moral anxiety. I fear my sexuality because it is overpowering and I feel like I'm going to lose control. That is the neurotic anxiety. Realistic anxiety, reality anxiety, I fear being hit by a car. Okay. So there's that question. You can look at it. All right. Defense mechanisms. So you've got the sex drive and the death drive, and these can give rise to a lot of moral and social discomfort, therefore punished by the superego, moral anxiety, and also threatening in and of themselves. That's neurotic anxiety. So to cope with these anxieties, these threats, the ego creates defense mechanisms. Okay. So let's go through them. The first defense mechanism, repression. You put an unpleasant memory or thought into the unconscious so you don't need to remember it. For example, if you witness a very traumatic incident, you may forget it, so you don't have to remember. Regression, going back to immature behavior from an earlier stage of development. Okay, so regressing from the oral, from the anal to the oral, going back to sucking your thumb when you are traumatized as a child. Displacement, redirecting unacceptable feelings from the original source to a safer substitute target. Often this would be, okay, somebody with more power than you shouts at you, you shout at someone with less power than you. Okay, so your boss shouts at you, you shout at your children. Sublimation, replacing socially unacceptable impulses with socially acceptable behavior. And so, of course, being in late Victorian society, it was all about sexual desire. Here you would sublimate your desire to win lots of women into ballroom dancing, okay? Or you would sublimate your aggressive desires into sports instead of violence. Reaction formation, acting in exactly the opposite way to your unacceptable impulses. So, for example, if you are a secret homosexually, you have secret homosexual drives, and you're Victorian in Freud's era, you might hate homosexuals as a reaction formation to those repressed desires. Okay, projection, attributing your own unacceptable feelings and thoughts to others and not yourself. Okay, so you think people are being unfaithful to you because you secretly desire to be unfaithful to them. Rationalization, creating false excuses for one's unacceptable feelings, thoughts, or behavior. Coming up with excuses, basically, to explain what you're doing and why. All right, there's a little quiz, just a simple memory test. More defenses: fixation, resistance, identification. Fixation is getting stuck at a particular stage of development. For example, a person fixated on food would have an oral fixation. There are three causes of fixation: pleasure, frustrated drive satisfaction, and fear. If you get too much of something, your drive towards getting more of it may be overpowering. This causes fixation. If you get too little of it, your drive is intensely frustrated and it builds up impetus, and therefore you get fixated at that level. Or fear. So if you are afraid of the next level of development, then you regress and you become fixated in an earlier stage. Okay. Resistance. Okay, we still use this concept a lot. A lot of these concepts we use a lot, but this one's like very off the tongue for most therapists. Resistance is the process of continuing to repress drives and urges that become conscious. But we also use it when we talk about resisting the therapist, resisting the process of psychotherapy. Okay. Identification. This is a positive defense mechanism. It's based on the desire to be like someone else. So especially during the phallic stage, boys want to be like their fathers. Identification is beneficial because, one, it keeps forbidden desires unconscious. Two, it gives the forbidden desires an outlet in fantasy. I can imagine that I'm my father. I can't have my mother, but I can imagine that I'm my father who can have my mother. And three, it develops the superego. Okay, so there are three positive defense mechanisms. One, identification. Two, displacement. This is to replace a forbidden object of a drive with a permitted one, only partially successful. Three, sublimation. Converting a forbidden drive into a more sublime form, so often the arts or sports. Okay, there's an amusing YouTube talk video. Little memory test again. Okay, Freud's personality theory. Okay, this is psychosexual theory, and there are 4 stages of development. First is the oral stage of personality development. From 0 to 18 months, babies are orally sexually driven to attain satisfaction from their mother's breast. The second is the anal stage, 18 months to 3. Children get most pleasure from excretion. The third is the phallic stage, 3 to 5 years old. Children get most pleasure from the genitals. These are the Oedipus and Electra complexes. The boy wants to kill his father and sleep with his mother. The girl develops penis envy. She wishes to woo her father in order to acquire a penis and feels anger towards her mother for not having one. Then there's the latent stage from 6 years old to puberty. The child has repressed, displaced, or sublimated the Oedipal or electrical complexes and identifies with a parent of the same gender. So they're focused on learning their gender roles, and it's a relatively peaceful time for them. And then fifth, the genital stage, which is puberty through to adulthood, and that is the final and penultimate stage. So it goes oral, anal, phallic, latent, and then genital. Okay. And for memory test, some interesting quotes. Okay, different ways that the stages can play out. Oral receptive personality, very trusting, dependent on others. This is the 2 kinds of fixation at the oral stage. So you can have oral receptive, okay, just about taking in. Oral aggressive or bitey and dominating, like it's a baby with teeth, okay? Anal stage, we normally know the anal retentive is classic, mean, stubborn, obsessively tidy. Anal expulsive, everything goes crazy, no boundaries, over emotional, very messy. These are both anal stage fixations. Phallic personality type is the fixation at the phallic stage. Self-assured, vain, and impulsive, unable to accept the subjugation into society and acting against it. Possibly a little like a rock star. And the genital personality type, which is the properly aged and adapted human being, well-adjusted, mature, able to love and be loved. And that is fixation at the genital stage. Optimal development. Okay, so Freud was mainly interested in the problem side of the human psyche. He didn't see healthy as radically different from unhealthy. It's a continuum, and you're constantly fighting for your state of integration and health. It's very precarious. Okay, it's built in that we're going to have challenges and difficulties just being human. All right. So why is the genital stage of development the best adjusted level? Number 1, you've developed beyond the earlier stages. 2, you're structurally sound. You have a reasonably balanced and strong ego and superego, so that you're not subject to the whims of the id, and you're not neurotically sublimating and suppressing everything and driving yourself half crazy with drives that have never been satisfied. You're able to sublimate and partially express your sexual and aggressive drives in a reasonably happy, moral, and fulfilling life without being overwhelmed by the id or suppressing it so extremely that you're extremely unhappy. Okay. Much will be gained if we succeed in transforming your hysterical misery into common unhappiness. With a mental life that has been restored to health, you will be better armed against that unhappiness. It's quite a sad, tragic, and melodramatic way of seeing the nature of humanity. Psychopathology. Abnormal behavior is just more exaggerated normal behavior. Psychological disorders are caused by an imbalance in the structure of the personality. The ego is too weak to manage conflict between the id and the superego. This would be because of the history of growing up in psychosocial development. Maybe the child got fixated at a particular level, the ego didn't develop properly, or the superego got overdeveloped, and there's just no space to breathe under that overdeveloped superego. Okay, and there may also be, at the time of the breakdown, contemporary contributory causes, stresses that are happening now. When the ego can't cope, that's when pathology arises. There are 3 types of mental disorder, according to Freud: neuroses, personality disorders, fixation and regression, and psychoses. When the ego can't cope with the demands of the id and the superego, it disintegrates. So the person loses touch with reality and withdraws from it. Okay, neuroses. Okay, oops. The ego generates symptoms as an attempt to manage overwhelming conflict between the id, ego, and superego. The symptom is an elegant solution to an unbearable problem because it does several things at once. It communicates unconscious wishes, much like a dream does. For example, in the textbook, Dora's sore throat expresses a forbidden wish for oral sex with her father. Okay, here this fainting expresses a forbidden wish that this handsome young man holds and cares for this young woman. Okay. Number 2, it punishes her for the moral transgression of her wish because it hurts her. Okay. It makes her ill. Number 3, it symbolically satisfies the wish. Her throat is examined by a male doctor and she has to swallow medication. So it's almost a sublimation of those desires and drives that cannot be expressed or satisfied. Number 4, it brings secondary advantages such as extra attention and benefits. Maybe she gets fussed over and special things are prepared for her. She gets more attention. Dreams, accidents, and symptoms. Dreams, like accidents and physical symptoms, are signposts to unconscious wishes, drives, and complexes. Little revision test, psychotherapy. Orthodox psychoanalytic analysis in the Freudian style is lengthy and intense, an hour a day for years without any guarantee of success. The therapist hardly speaks and does not react. He sits behind the client, who is usually lying down. The goal is to uncover the unconscious and to uncover conflict between the drives, society, and morality, and then to teach the client ways to get maximum expression of the drives within the confines of morality and society. So it's all about compromise, self-discovery, and then making sad and compromising choices between what you really want the world to be like and what it really is like, what you would love to have and what you have to settle for. There's a lot of use of dreams and free association. Key concepts in psychotherapy. Resistance. To avoid becoming conscious of unconscious wishes and desires, the client resists analysis, avoiding a subject, forgetting things, not arriving for the appointment. These are all forms of resistance. Number 2, transference. Transference is a very important process in psychoanalysis. The client transfers feelings of love, desire, and aggression onto the analyst, who basically gives them space where it's safe to explore those feelings of love, desire, and aggression without the catastrophic consequences they have in real life. And this brings the pain and emotional intensity of those feelings into consciousness so that they may be explored with and worked with until they're integrated into a healthy ego. So there's actually a lot of vulnerability and trust on the part of the client towards the therapist in order for psychoanalysis to work. It takes great courage. Okay, let's look at the Freudian theory and how it explains aggression. According to Freud, aggression is inherent. It can be caused by a weak moral code, which means so that the superego is strong enough to suppress the id, because it's inherent in the id, or stronger drives towards aggression. To some people have particularly strong id and death wishes. So some aggression is basically a death wish that's been repressed and turned around into aggression. Okay, so solutions to aggression: socially accepted catharsis, for example, through violent sports, sublimation into not killing people, but rather scoring goals past them, or displacement. So if you can't aggress towards people, you maybe can aggress by hunting. Okay. There's possible expression through identification with a positive role model as well. So a hero and the narratives of great fighters. Also, the strengthening of moral standards to bring the id under control via the superego. And there's a picture of Freud as a child. All right, so that is a summary of the study material. You do need to read the textbook. I hope this helps. There are many little multiple choices in here that will help you to remember the material.